and welcome to the revised edition of my 9/11 program, which was initially produced in the early part of 2014. Before I continue, however, I must say one word of love and respect to my dear mother who passed on earlier this year. She gave me the unconditional love that every child deserves, and any good deed I've ever done in my life I have to attribute directly to her. So to you, my mom, thank you so very much for all that you did for me, and to all mothers indeed. Moving back. 9/11. This for me is the litmus test. No other issue provides an opportunity for us to see the depth of integrity of anybody who speaks in a public area about the truth surrounding this event. Now, I made this project early in 2014 with the expressed intent of showing whose fingerprints were all over it. And in fact, I give very, very strong evidence to support who should be indicted. We don't need a new investigation. We need to indict certain individuals because the evidence that's already in the public realm is more than explanatory. But I was motivated to actually do a second revision or a revision of the initial program because of our dear friend David Cameron. Now, like everybody else, I love a good laugh, so when I watch David Cameron or any of these other jokers, Obama, whoever else they parade out in front of us, it's definitely worth a good laugh. One of the things I learned many years ago was never lose your sense of humor. So, David Cameron gave a speech at the United Nations General Assembly just a couple months back, and I've watched this entire charade of a speech, and it is very amusing. However, there are a few points that are made that are of specific interest, so what I'd like to do is show certain segments of his speech and then sort of break it down step by step. Without further ado, on to David Cameron.
Overcoming what I want to focus on today, which is the mortal threat we all face from the rise of ISIL in Syria and Iraq.
Now, the first thing that we have to say about anybody who makes comments about so-called ISIL, ISIS, whatever the hell they call themselves, is if anyone wants to speak seriously about this, whether it's a Western leader or whatever prostitute politician or pundit in the media they put out there, if these people do not acknowledge the very direct support that so-called ISIL, ISIS has gotten from the West, then they're not serious, and no one should take them serious. The fact that the West has blatantly supported our allies, Saudi Arabia in particular, Qatar, while they have been funding these mercenaries is simply indisputable. It's a matter of public record. The fact that we have provided training to ISIL in Jordan and that our good friends and allies, Turkey, have been shuttling these psychopaths across the border from Turkey into Syria, all of this is indisputable. The fact that they're running around with American weapons, the fact they're running around in Humvees, M16s, I used to use an M16, brand new M16s, all that sort of stuff is simply indisputable. And yet this joker is getting up and talking about ISIS as if we have nothing to do with it. Never mind the fact that we've destroyed several other countries in this same bogus thing called the War on Terror.
We must not allow past mistakes to become an excuse for indifference or inaction.
So this is incredible. We cannot let past mistakes. Are you talking about the mistake of invading Afghanistan and Iraq and also destroying Libya? Are you talking about the so-called mistake in which we invaded Afghanistan based on the pretext that Osama bin Laden was responsible, and yet not once has this man been indicted because even the FBI admitted they don't have any evidence linking Osama bin Laden to 9/11. So what the hell did we invade Afghanistan for? That's a pretty big mistake. And if you go back to the Nuremberg tribunals, wars of aggression are the supreme crime. People hung for that in Nazi Germany. I'm wondering why we don't have anybody hanging for the war of aggression that we fought in Afghanistan. And even more ridiculous and insane is the invasion and occupation of Iraq that is translated to the deaths of 1 million, perhaps 2 million, millions of refugees, millions of orphans running around without a parent or even both parents as a result of this. And then we go to Libya, in which we've totally destroyed that country. And we want to do the same thing and have largely done the same thing with our policy towards Syria. So is that the mistake that David Cameron is talking about? How easy for us to dismiss this without any Western leader having paid any price at all for any of these hideous crimes?
We should be comprehensive, defeating the ideology of extremism that is the root cause of this terrorism, so that we win the battle of ideas, not just the battle of military might.
Now, this is the amazing part of this speech, which the same theme is being carried forward by Obama and other such prostitutes. This conflation of so-called extremists coupled with nonviolent extremists with terrorists. So it looks like all of us who question the official propaganda of the state, are actually going to be deemed, or already being deemed, extremists. And as extremists, really, we're not any different from ISIS or ISIL, because our ideology, our ideas are the seed for which this violence grows. And this is a theme we're going to see more of in this speech. And I'd just like everyone to realize that it's not just the so-called extremists like myself. It's pretty much anybody out there who questions the official propaganda is, in this Orwellian 1984 world of ours, a so-called extremist.
And we should be uncompromising.
Uncompromising. This is a word used more than once in this speech. And wow, the West should be uncompromising, should it? I guess that means more invasions, more mass murder, more depleted uranium, white phosphorus, and all that sort of stuff.
Using all the means at our disposal, including military force, to hunt down these extremists.
Here again we see extremist. Extremist, terrorist, extremist. Very purposely conflated.
Let me take each of these in turn. The root cause of this terrorist threat is a poisonous ideology of Islamist extremism. We must defeat this ideology in all its forms.
So here we go. Key. We must defeat this form of extremism in all its forms, in all of its forms. So, not just the violent extremists, all of its forms, including, you quote, non-violent extremists. Definitely got to fight that.
As evidence emerges about the backgrounds of those convicted of terrorist offenses, it is clear that many of them were initially influenced by preachers who claim not to encourage violence, but whose worldview can be used as a justification for it. We know this worldview, the peddling of lies, that 9/11 was somehow a Jewish plot.
Aha, here we go. This is to the heart of the matter here. We know this worldview, don't we? Like those who peddle the lie that 9/11 was a Jewish plot. Are we to deny that Jewish Mossad agents were celebrating the 9/11 attacks and filming the event while other bystanders were wondering what the hell is going on? These same Jewish Mossad agents were talking about this on Israeli television, the so-called dancing Israelis. How about the Jewish Israelis who were caught with explosives in their van? This hits at the crux. Actually, this is the motivation for doing this revamped, revitalized, and improved version of this 9/11 program, because at the end of the day, the litmus test of 9/11 is those who will speak honestly about whose fingerprints are all over this. And I can tell you the powers that be are so deathly afraid of those of us who have the courage to speak out about who is responsible for 9/11, because indeed it involves Jewish agents, including Jewish Mossad agents, including so-called dual national traitors in the United States. Many of the people actively involved in the false flag that is 9/11 are in fact Jewish. And those of us who are not afraid to say it, of course, must be called extremists, mustn't we?
Or that the 7/7 London attacks were staged.
Ah, yes, the idea that the 7/7 false flag was somehow staged. Well, let's talk about the explosives under the tube, which blew up. How did somebody carrying a backpack with explosives manage to put a backpack on the deck of a tube car and have that explosion actually come up from under the floor? That was explosives planted underneath, and there's a myriad of other things that show that indeed that was another false flag event. But again, those of us who can see the obvious must be extremists.
The idea that Muslims are persecuted all over the world as a deliberate act of Western policy.
Wow, now this is just incredible. The idea that Muslims are being targeted as part of Western policy. Wow, who would have thought that? Who would even suggest something so crazy? I don't know, maybe the fact that we've targeted Muslims who were falsely blamed for this event. Clearly Muslims did not carry out 9/11. No way Muhammad Atta drinking booze, snorting cocaine, going out with a stripper. Yeah, he was on a jihad. None of these people knew how to fly these planes. They were CIA stooges running around like idiots, getting paid to go here, go there, everywhere, and be the patsies. And yet all the evidence makes this clear, and yet we've invaded only Muslim countries. We are targeting Muslims. We still have people, Muslims, in Guantanamo. Who knows how many we've tortured and killed that we don't know about. Oh, God forbid we start looking at Western policy for what it is and actually seeing that it's targeting Muslims.
And we must stop the so-called non-violent extremists from inciting hatred and intolerance in our schools, our universities, and yes, even our prisons.
And here we go again, the non-violent extremists. Welcome to the club if you, like me, are sick and tired of these prostitutes spouting their lies. It is an embarrassment for any of us who live in the West to see these absolutely insane psychopaths get up and talk this rubbish that they talk, and the idea that we're the extremists, when in fact it is our governments who are sending off American and British sons and daughters along with whoever others involved in the so-called coalitions we create to kill innocent people, including, by this stage, hundreds of thousands of children and women, defenseless people. But of course, we're the extremists, those of us who are sick and tired of these insane policies. George Orwell in 1984 have nothing on David Cameron.
Would we sit back and allow right-wing extremists, Nazis or Ku Klux Klansmen to recruit on our university campuses? No.
No, we wouldn't allow that. We wouldn't allow psychopaths who speak such rubbish to actually become prime ministers and presidents now, will we? Psychopath, pathological liars. No, we wouldn't allow that. All right, no, actually that is what we allow, don't we?
Finally, when the safety and security of our people is at stake, we must be uncompromising in our response.
So here we are again, that word uncompromising. With the safety and security of our people at stake. Well, okay, let's dissect that just a bit. You know what the odds are of actually being killed by a terrorist incident in the UK and around the world, in fact? It's roughly 1 in 20 million. Now, I want you to think about that, especially the next time you go to take a shower. Because the next time you go to take a shower, beware of the fact that you have a much greater chance of falling, hitting your head and dying than you do from a terrorist incident. But I don't see the police state being justified by the fear of people dying in the bathtub. No, I don't see that at all. But I do see everyone's rights being taken away based on an absolutely ridiculous, insane, false, so-called war on terror in which we can violate people in the most obscene of ways, invade, occupy, torture, kill, imprison with no due process, and take away whatever rights we supposedly had under the US Constitution or Magna Carta in the UK. Uncompromising. Yeah, right.
My message today is simple. We are facing an evil against which the whole of the world should unite.
Indeed, we are facing an evil in which the whole world should unite. And it ain't who we're being told, that's for damn sure. These absolute traitors, Cameron, Obama, Bush, Blair, you name it, whoever they trot out next, these traitors have represented us. They have used your taxes, my taxes, to kill people en masse. Indeed, the evil that exists is one of which we are responsible, most particularly those of us from the United States, Britain, and Israel. This unholy alliance, this true axis of evil, these three countries which effectively have destroyed all due process of law, turned international law into nothing more than a tool of the most greedy and psychopathic leaders that exist on this planet. Indeed, this evil is something that we should all unite against.
And as ever, in the cause of freedom, democracy, and justice, Britain will play its part. Thank you.
Oh, indeed, Britain will play its part as it always does. We can count on good old Britain. And you know what? This David Cameron, I really need to thank you, David, very, very much. When such an idiot like yourself gets up and speaks this kind of rubbish, it really does serve as motivation to actually redouble my efforts and actually speak the truth, uncompromisingly, as you would say. So I want to thank the viewers for this program because I have heard from many of you that you indeed have thought that this was the best 9/11 program that you have ever seen. I take that as a huge compliment because I know of many great works, many great people who have spoken honestly about 9/11. So hopefully this new and improved version will attract even more viewers, and hey, maybe I'll get lucky and be convicted of nonviolent extremism in the UK.
nation in every region now has a decision to make. Either you are with us or you are with the terrorists.
When I took on this show, I knew that certain issues needed to be discussed right up front. And top of the list was 9/11, because no event has affected our world, especially the Middle East, more than 9/11. But all the major players in this event have received obvious cover from the governments, academics, and of course, the mainstream media. Aside from the sycophants protecting their masters, there is a much more insidious enemy of truth known as political correctness. I will not bow to such manipulations. Political correctness is a trap, functioning as a tool to prevent honest dialogue. It fosters, if not compels, self-censorship. It is a blatant form of thought control. So when I use the word Jew instead of Zionist, for example, I do so because it is the most accurate word to describe those whose primary allegiance is to the Jewish state of Israel. To use the word Zionist, as the thought police would have of me, would deny the fact that Israel is the Jewish state, not the Zionist state. Take the Christian Zionists, which are some of Israel's staunchest supporters. They're not granted the same right of settlement as their Jewish counterparts. Why? Well, because they're Zionists, but they are not Jewish. In the end, nobody is better placed to stop the criminality of the Jewish state than Jews themselves.
Go back to where you came from. You know where you came from?
For the speedy and peaceful dismantlement of the state of Israel. Then we can once again coexist as we have for hundreds of years. We have older rabbis who will testify lived in the old state of Jerusalem. In the old state, in the old city of Jerusalem. In the old city, they lived door by door. This rabbi lived in the old city of Jerusalem. Before 1948, he'll tell you how he lived, coexisted with all the Arab neighbors, how they babysat each other's children when they went to Yom Kippur, when the women went to Yom Kippur on the fast day, the Muslim neighbors babysat the children, the most precious objects they gave to them to protect.
Whether we like it or not, taking responsibility for the actions of our governments that operate in our name, that receive our complicity and our support, is essential to solving the problems we face. Blame shifting, on the other hand, is tantamount to voluntary maintenance of the tyranny. As for my motivations, I consider every single human being to be a brother or sister in one human family. And I want what is best for every member of my family. And I mean every member. But patronizing talk and false sensitivity helps nobody. Let there be no mistake. My greatest scorn is reserved for my birth nation of the United States, that is without doubt the greatest terrorist entity of the 20th and 21st centuries, regardless of the fact that it has been hijacked by traitors and foreign agents. So if the citizens of the Jewish state and the United States want to avoid the virtually inevitable retribution coming their way, it will be by changing their disastrous course without delay. In this sense, I am all too ironically a friend to the Jewish state and the American people, because both must face their criminal nature while they still have a chance. And to make this point that much clearer, if the situation were reversed and the Jewish people were being broadly blamed for the crimes of 9/11 when clearly they were patsies, I would be the first to stand up in their defense. Let me also extend an open invitation to Israeli, British, and American government representatives so as to challenge me on any point I make in this program or future programs, with a special invitation to Israeli spokesperson Mark Regev, who I will devote an entire program to one-on-one debate if he has the courage to take me up on it. If, however, these governments and their trolls simply choose to sling mud, you can rest assured it is because they are cowardly propagandists who could never back up their insultingly false incantations outside of the cozy confines of the whorehouses they frequent, otherwise known as the mass media. Before we explore the truth regarding 9/11, I must thank Christopher Bolin, Mark Glenn, Jonathan Azaziah, Mark Dankoff, and Xander Z. Fereza for reviewing the content of this program. They have provided invaluable input. Now, the first thing to discuss about 9/11 is the fact that this event is quite possibly the greatest mind control event in human history. Certain aspects of it are so stark, so profound, that within this historic event can be seen a tremendous gift. But firstly, let me acknowledge the obvious. While my birth nation of America has meted out more violence in the 20th and 21st century than any other entity, it does not change the fact that the events of 9/11 are a great tragedy, not only for what happened on the day, but also for the far, far greater suffering and death that has resulted from it. Having said that, the gift lies in 9/11 serving as a litmus test for humanity. Indeed, I will make the case that we have reached a flashpoint in human history that will decide the fate of all life on planet Earth, because in the nuclear age, we simply cannot sustain the collective insanity of our current path. We have come this close to nuclear annihilation many times over, and facing the truth about 9/11 can be the beginning of the end of that insanity. The good news is that poll after poll makes very clear that more and more people do not trust the official account of 9/11. Around the world, it is safe to say that the majority of people do not accept the official version of the event. In America itself, roughly half doubt or disbelieve the official version altogether. And herein lies the heart of the gift. Despite all of the mass media deception, people are seeing straight through the lies and regaining the capacity to think and process information intelligently. This is absolutely critical in the process of liberating humanity from the bondage and ignorance and division. I have often used a metaphor to describe the current state of human existence, and it goes like this. Human society has created and ultimately consented to the institutions of power that oppress us, to such a degree that we the people have constructed a massive prison that every man, woman, and child, for the most part, have voluntarily entered. We have then closed the prison door behind us, taken the key within our collective hands and locked the prison door. As if this wasn't bad enough, incredibly, we have then handed the key to the prison door to a group of psychopathic tyrants who have all too wisely remained outside of the prison. Subsequently, we continue to beg these tyrants for the crumbs while we continue to remain locked in a prison of our own making. Now, the prison is a metaphor for our current financial system, a financial system utilized by the tyrants to control virtually every aspect of human existence. And yet, and please listen to what I am saying here, the tyrants are powerless without our consent. And while we have collectively entered this prison, we can tear down the prison walls of financial enslavement in an instant. No matter what our religion, non-religion, what color we are, what country we come from, what group we relate to, or what philosophy we subscribe to, we, the masses, have the same cause. We want the same things. We want to live a dignified life. We want a just and peaceful world. The powers that be know this very well, and that is why they must continuously divide us and rule us. The key to the maintenance of their tyranny is hoodwinking us into fighting each other for the crumbs from their lavish tables. And believe me, the powers that be revel in the madness that is our division and ultimately self-imposed enslavement. They are laughing at us. They mock us. But it doesn't have to be this way. Do you want a better world, a sane, just, and peaceful world? Well, so do I. In fact, I demand such a world because I refuse to accept the unacceptable. And while I hold the tyrants responsible for ungodly amounts of suffering and injustice and death, I cannot ignore the fact that they could not possibly have achieved this without the massive compliance from the masses, from us. Which brings us back to an uncomfortable truth, which is that we are guilty to one degree or another. I want to issue a huge apology to a group to which I am not a member. Because as I will lay out very clearly, if there is one group that cannot be held responsible for the 9/11 event, it is the very group blamed for this crime. And that would be the Muslims around the world. So let me say with resounding clarity on behalf of all sane, thinking people, we are deeply sorry that Muslims have been falsely accused of the events of 9/11 and that subsequently, countless Muslim lands and people have endured the farcical war on terror. We apologize for the invasions, occupations, drone strikes, torture, Guantanamo, for all of the maiming and the death that has rained down on you. Let it be understood from this day forward, from this non-Muslim, that we know the 9/11 false flag was intentionally, falsely blamed on you so as to cultivate a clash of civilizations. We reject the war on terror in total and shall identify those responsible come hell or high water. When we return, we shall discuss the absurdity of the official version of 9/11 and, more importantly, whose fingerprints are left all over this event. The official version of 9/11. Here's a brief description of the official version. 19 hijackers, mostly of Saudi origin, were headed by a lead hijacker named Mohammed Atta. The hijackers received flight school training for small, single and twin-engine airplanes at various flight schools in the United States. These hijackers were directed by Al-Qaeda leader Osama bin Laden, who lived in caves in Afghanistan while requiring dialysis to survive. Together, they managed to outwit the entire defense systems of America, despite the fact that in 2001 the United States invested more money and resources in defense than just about every other nation on the planet combined. We were told that the breathtakingly vast defense and intelligence apparatus of America had not contemplated the possibility of airplanes being used to fly into buildings. On 9/11, there was a U.S. military defense drill codenamed Vigilant Guardian that simulated the exact events of 9/11. As a result of this drill, there was confusion about whether there was a real or simulated hijacking, and thus 19 individuals managed to allegedly hijack 4 planes and freely roam American airspace without any challenge from U.S. interceptor fighter jets. The official version tells us the hijackers successfully hit 3 out of 4 targets on 9/11, with one airplane being brought down by heroic passengers who shouted, "Let's roll," before overwhelming the box cutter-armed Muslim fanatic terrorists. The other planes, however, hit the Twin Towers and allegedly the Pentagon in Washington, D.C. as well, which happens to be the most heavily guarded airspace on planet Earth. While none of the virtually indestructible black boxes of any of the 4 airplanes were ever proven to be recovered, including that of Flight 93, which apparently managed an intact nosedive into a field in Pennsylvania, which occurred at such a high rate of speed that none of the actual plane, fuselage, jet engine, seats, or bodies was ever recovered. However, officials did recover 2 of the hijackers' passports and a bandana, as well as another alleged hijacker's passport from Flight 11, which slammed into the North Tower, causing a massive fireball. Although just 2 of the buildings were hit by planes in New York City, 3 buildings were completely destroyed, while 7 buildings were either partially or fully destroyed. The Twin Towers almost entirely turned to dust, while Building 7 collapsed in a process that resembled a controlled demolition, with each of the 3 buildings falling at free-fall speed. We are told that the destruction of the Twin Towers was caused by the weakening of the steel support columns from jet fuel fires, and that Building 7 collapsed uniformly in a free fall due to a standard office fire. This is the first and only time in history that has occurred to such buildings, steel support, steel frame buildings. We are also told that the Pentagon was hit by an airplane whose pilot executed a 270-degree banking right turn as it descended 8,000 feet, all the while managing to avoid detection of upwards to 85 surveillance cameras covering its flight path as it apparently flew directly into the Pentagon. Footage from the 85-plus surveillance cameras was confiscated by the FBI, but they assure us it was just as described. The commission created to carry out the official investigation required 442 days to be formed by a foot-dragging Bush administration. No less than Henry Kissinger was appointed to lead the investigation, and the total budget allocated to investigate the biggest crime in the history of America was a staggeringly minuscule $14 million. By comparison, the U.S. government budgeted $160 million, when adjusted for inflation, to investigate the Space Shuttle Challenger disaster in 1986.
On the morning of September 11, 2001, 19 men armed with box cutters, directed by a man on dialysis in a cave fortress halfway around the world using a satellite phone and a laptop, directed the most sophisticated penetration of the most heavily defended airspace in the world. overpowering the passengers and the military combat-trained pilots on 4 commercial aircraft before flying those planes wildly off course for over an hour without being molested by a single fighter interceptor. These 19 hijackers, devout religious fundamentalists who like to drink alcohol, snort cocaine, and live with pink-haired strippers, managed to knock down 3 buildings with 2 planes in New York, while in Washington, a pilot who couldn't handle a single-engine Cessna was able to fly a 757 in an 8,000-foot descending 270-degree corkscrew turn to come exactly level with the ground, hitting the Pentagon in the Budget Analyst Office where DoD staffers were working on the mystery of the $2.3 trillion that Defense Secretary Donald Rumsfeld had announced missing from the Pentagon's coffers in a press conference the day before, on September 10th, 2001. Luckily, the news anchors knew who did it within minutes.
Osama bin Laden.
The pundits knew within hours.
Osama bin Laden.
The administration knew within the day.
Terrorists who committed these acts and those who harbor them.
And the evidence literally fell into the FBI's lap.
That a hijacker's passport was found blocks from the World Trade Center crash site, if you can believe that.
But for some reason, a bunch of crazy conspiracy theorists demanded an investigation into the greatest attack on American soil in history. That investigation was delayed, underfunded, set up to fail, a conflict of interest, and a cover-up from start to finish. It was based on testimony extracted through torture, the records of which were destroyed. It failed to mention the existence of WTC-7, Able Danger, P-TECH, Sibel Edmonds, OBL and the CIA, and the drills of hijacked aircraft being flown into buildings that were being simulated at the precise same time that those events were actually happening. It was lied to by the Pentagon, the CIA, the Bush administration, and as for Bush and Cheney, well, no one knows what they told it because they testified in secret, off the record, not under oath, and behind closed doors. It didn't bother to look at who funded the attacks because that question is ultimately of little practical significance. Still, the 9/11 Commission did brilliantly answering all of the questions the public had, except most of the victims' family members' questions, and pinned blame on all the people responsible, although no one so much as lost their job, determining the attacks were
failure of imagination.
Because
Nobody in our government, at least, and I don't think the prior government that could envision flying airplanes into buildings.
Except the Pentagon, FEMA, NORAD, and the NRO. The DIA destroyed 2.5 terabytes of data on Able Danger, but that's okay because it probably wasn't important. The SEC destroyed their records on the investigation into the insider trading before the attacks, but that's okay because destroying the records of the largest investigation in SEC history is just part of routine record keeping. NIST has classified the data that they used for their model of WTC-7's collapse, but that's okay because knowing how they made their model of the collapse would jeopardize public safety. The FBI has argued that all material related to their investigation of 9/11 should be kept secret from the public, but that's okay because the FBI probably has nothing to hide. This man never existed, nor is anything he had to say worthy of your attention, and if you say otherwise, you are a paranoid conspiracy theorist and deserve to be shunned by all of humanity. Likewise him, and her, and her, and her, and him. Osama bin Laden lived in a cave fortress in the hills of Afghanistan, but somehow got away. Then he was hiding out in Tora Bora, but somehow got away. Then he lived in Abbottabad for years, taunting the most comprehensive intelligence dragnet employing the most sophisticated technology in the history of the world for a decade, releasing video after video with complete impunity and getting younger and younger as he did so, before finally being found in a daring SEAL team raid which wasn't recorded on video, in which he didn't resist or use his wife as a human shield, and in which these crack special forces operatives panicked and killed this unarmed man, supposedly the best source of intelligence about those dastardly terrorists on the entire planet. Then they dumped his body in the ocean before telling anyone about it. Then a couple dozen of that team's members died in a helicopter crash in Afghanistan. This is the story of 9/11, brought to you by the media which told you the hard truths about
his head could be seen to move violently forward.
And
they took the babies out of the incubators.
And
mobile production facilities.
And
the rescue of Jessica Lynch.
If you have any questions about this story, you are a batshit paranoid tinfoil dog-abusing baby hater and will be reviled by everyone. If you love your country and or freedom, happiness, rainbows, rock and roll, puppy dogs, apple pie, and your grandma, you will never ever express doubts about any part of this story to anyone. Ever. This has been a public service announcement by the Friends of the FBI, CIA, NSA, DIA, SEC, MSM, White House, NIST, and the 9/11 Commission. Because ignorance is strength.
Let us never tolerate outrageous conspiracy theories concerning the attacks of September the 11th. Malicious lies that attempt to shift the blame away from the terrorists themselves, away from the guilty. Conspiracy theories. Conspiracy theories.
Conspiracy theories.
The official version of 9/11 is a terribly bad B movie. It is a massive insult to our intelligence and all too significantly reveals the depth of mind control that many in our world are subject to. All too ironically, those of us who are not so brain dead as to believe the official version are called conspiracy theorists, despite the obvious fact that the official version of 9/11 is in fact, you guessed it, a conspiracy. It just so happens to be the most ridiculous conspiracy of them all. And let us not forget these important facts. Osama bin Laden himself denied any involvement in 9/11. And before you have that knee-jerk reaction of saying he confessed to it on video, hold that thought. With regard to America's supposed need to invade Afghanistan in pursuit of bin Laden, the Taliban stated on record that they would extradite him if only the United States would adhere to this paltry little thing called due process of law, which also involves another little thing called evidence. As it turns out, the U.S. decided in favor of invading and occupying two nations and turning them back to the Stone Age. As far as the evidence is concerned, it's a sort of don't worry about it kind of thing, so bin Laden was never actually charged with any crime regarding 9/11. With the FBI stating in 2006 that there was, quote, no hard evidence linking bin Laden to 9/11. Going back to the supposed bin Laden video confession, if the FBI does not believe it, why do you? As for the supposed 19 hijackers, there is no video evidence of any of the hijackers boarding the planes, from airports controlled by Israeli security no less. Several items have been used as evidence to implicate these patsies, but these are ridiculous. As already mentioned, 3 passports belonging to alleged hijackers were supposedly recovered. In the case of Satam al-Sakami's passport, it is said to have survived the plane crash's explosive fireball in the North Tower, falling hundreds of feet to the ground and then randomly picked up by a passerby who delivered it to the New York Police Department. In pristine condition, no less, with no burns, tears, or rips, with the picture and name perfectly visible. Once again, no bodies or plane wreckage was recovered from the alleged Flight 93 crash site in Shanksville, Pennsylvania, supposedly because the plane crashed at such an incredible rate of speed that apparently everything vaporized. Nonetheless, 2 passports, a martyrdom note, and a red bandana that is said to have been worn by one of the hijackers was remarkably recovered.
There is one thing that defines everyone over the course of these early years of this new century. That thing is the 9/11 attack. Everyone in government in every field of endeavor, the world over, is defined by their position on this event. It is not necessary to know the truth. It is only necessary to know the extent of the lies in order to define any leader in any position anywhere in the world. By what they have said and by what they have not said, one can accurately judge who is an enemy of the peoples of the world. One can accurately determine who is a tool of the psychopaths, or one of them. Think about what you allow yourself to know. Think about what you pass by, ignore, deny, and defend that defines you. It defines the degree of your personal courage, your relationship to the truth, your values, your principles, and what you will pass on to your children and everyone you meet. It tells you, in that place where your conscience must once have lived, whether you are a hypocrite and a fool, or whether something greater still lives within you. 19 men passed through airport security. 11 of them are stopped and questioned, but then allowed to board. Several large passenger planes wind up hijacked and flown at high speed into enormous buildings. None of these men had shown previous capacity to accomplish this feat. These men were armed with box cutters. No jet fighters were scrambled to intercept these planes, although the authorities in charge of such actions knew immediately what was happening. Airport traffic controllers were ordered to destroy all recorded evidence of the event. Some of them physically broke the CDs and scattered the pieces into different trash containers at the airports. Within hours, 3 of the biggest buildings in the city, buildings designed to absorb the impact of the very planes which hit them, all crumbled into their own footprints at the speed of free fall. It was said that the fire, which burned below the melting point of steel, caused this to happen. No fire in history had previously accomplished such a thing, not once. Previous fires had burned hotter and longer, yet no building fell. Now, 3 have fallen in one day. Months later, the wreckage burned white hot beneath the surface, and clear cuts and support beams were photographed. A passport from one of the hijackers appears on a city street, undamaged. Cars are discovered at airports with flight training videos and Qurans. Apparently the men, who were deeply religious enough to give their lives to attack these buildings, thought nothing of leaving their sacred texts behind. Some weeks later, 7 of the alleged hijackers are found to be alive in their native countries. Some days earlier, some of these men were observed drinking and having lap dances in a Florida bar. This sort of behavior is not normal for such men as these. Around the same time, the ringleader of these men and some associates were observed by the FBI boarding a gambling boat belonging to Jack Abramoff. These men were tracked to Las Vegas and watched by the FBI, yet they passed through the airport security checkpoints. Even though 11 of them were stopped and questioned, they still boarded. On the day of the event, several men were observed videotaping the attack as it happened. They were seen to be dancing and celebrating as well. The police stopped and arrested them. They were found to be Mossad agents. Sometime later, they were quietly released and returned to their home country with no reasons given. The men videotaping and celebrating had to have known about the attack in advance in order to have been in a position to film it. Members of the bin Laden family, the man accused of masterminding the attack, were immediately flown out of the country. Bin Laden denied any connection to this attack. Direct evidence of this exists, and no evidence of his admitting his involvement exists. All of this is fabrication and hearsay. No one can present such information other than one fabricated video that was proven false by the world's leading forensic experts in Switzerland. Many insist it is true, but no one has such evidence. Go look. Show it to me. As a result of this event, major wars have been launched. Over 1 million people have died, with nearly another 5 million displaced. An investigation was launched into the event against the wishes of the president and vice president, and rubber-stamped with pre-dawn conclusions, even though the evidence did not support these conclusions. The wreckage was gathered together and shipped overseas. No one was allowed to investigate it. In every event in New York City, in a Pennsylvania field, at the Pentagon, all of the evidence is contradictory. The amount of evidence on every level that directly refutes what we have been told fills thousands of pages. Meanwhile, the administration and the Congress belligerently oppose any inquiry into the matter. People in government who have questioned the official story have been fired from their jobs or driven from office by the very party they are a member of. University professors are fired for discussing it. Major websites composed of experts in their fields are ignored and even censured. Casual investigation of who benefited and who engineered actions of global impact based on official 911 findings all lead to the same parties. It is incontrovertibly true that one organization, PNAC, called for an attack on American soil in order to facilitate what followed. Members of this organization held key positions in and around the present administration. Therefore, here is what you must know, given that the official story is patently absurd. Anyone I mean anyone who promotes the official story, who accepts the official story, who oppresses those who doubt the official story, who does not question the official story, is involved or too stupid to pat their head and chew gum at the same time. Any presidential candidate who does not dispute the official story is a traitor to their nation and a tool of those who accomplished this attack. It all comes down to 911. Everything that has happened based on a lie. Everyone in government, in the media, in entertainment, in organized religion, in the public eye, and in the public who accepts and promotes the official story is either a traitor or a tool. Everyone who does not stand forth and speak truth to power is a coward, a liar, and complicit in mass murder. Everyone, everywhere can be measured according to this litmus test.
So now, let us extract ourselves from the collective insanity required to even entertain the official version of 9/11. Instead, let us take a look at reality and the evidence around 9/11 that is part of the public record. As you will see, this evidence indicts certain players who were indeed motivated by a religious fanaticism, but they are not Muslims. First off, let us acknowledge the obvious. The U.S. government has done everything in its power to pervert the course of justice, and that in itself is a major crime, given the mass murder they continue to cover up. So this fact alone indicts the U.S. government. Aside from that, the odds of a drill simulating the exact events of the actual reality occurring as pure coincidence is like a fairy story. With no disrespect to those who believe in fairies, because I myself accept the existence of fairies as a far more likely possibility than the myriad of coincidences that officially occurred regarding 9/11. Speaking of coincidences, imagine that you are a Jewish billionaire businessman named Larry Silverstein, and that you have set your sights on acquiring some of the most expensive real estate in the world, specifically the World Trade Center complex with its crown jewels known as the Twin Towers. However, there's a bit of a problem. The Twin Towers were full of cancer-causing asbestos, and the cost estimates for removal of the asbestos range from the low billions to the tens of billions. Far, far more than the outdated, half-empty Twin Towers were worth. Indeed, the Twin Towers were such a liability that the Port Authority of New York had been desperately seeking a way to demolish them since 1990. But the cost of doing so prevented them from doing this because the toxic asbestos was extremely difficult and dangerous to remove. On May 14th, 2001, 4 months before 9/11, the Port Authority lost a lawsuit that meant it was on the hook to remove that asbestos. The head of the Port Authority was Louis Eisenberg, and he personally oversaw the privatization that led to Larry Silverstein and Frank Lowy obtaining the 99-year lease for the towers on July 24th, 2001, just 6 weeks before 9/11. But Silverstein demanded and got $3.5 billion worth of insurance payable in cash if the towers were destroyed. Now, the fact that Silverstein was close friends with Benjamin Netanyahu, or that he skipped his daily breakfast at the Windows on the World restaurant located on the 107th floor of the North Tower on 9/11, or that his son and daughter also happened to be unexpectedly absent on 9/11, is all just amazing good fortune, we are told.
In the days before, I think, the World Trade Center, the Twin Towers fell, I understand you had daily breakfast meetings with people, I think, in the Windows of the World, the famous restaurant, the World Trade Center.
That's correct.
But you weren't there for breakfast on the day of September 11th. Why was that?
That morning, my wife had made an appointment for me at the dermatologist, who I have to visit with regularity, right? And as I'm dressing to go to the dermatologist that morning, I looked at my wife and said, you know, I've got so much to do downtown. Cancel the dermatologist. I've got to go downtown. She got upset. She said, you can't cancel. You've got to go.
Was that Larry Silverstein's luck?
It was clearly my luck. It was clearly my luck.
Larry's business partner is quite a character himself. Jewish billionaire Frank Lowy, who leased the shopping concourse area called the Mall at the World Trade Center, made up of approximately 427,000 square feet of retail floor space, Lowy is a Hungarian Jew born in Czechoslovakia with Israeli citizenship. In 1946, he made his way to Palestine, then under the British Mandate, where he joined the Jewish terrorist group known as Haganah. From there, he joined the notorious Golani Brigade and partook in the ethnic cleansing of Al-Jalil. Lowy is personal friends with the entire Likud leadership, Netanyahu, Sharon, etc. He lives in Israel part of the year and has established numerous think tanks to promote Israeli geopolitical interests. So Silverstein's and Lowy's investment would have to be considered one of the worst investments in the history of our world, were it not for the little coincidence of 2 planes bringing down 7 buildings within 6 weeks of leasing the property and them taking out a multi-billion-dollar insurance policy, which resulted in Silverstein and Lowy receiving an insurance payoff of over $5 billion. Not bad at all. When Silverstein was asked why he purchased the Twin Towers lease, he simply said, quote, "I felt a compelling urge to own them." Let us imagine that Lucky Larry was instead named Mohammed, and he was a Muslim instead of a Jew. And Mohammed bought this dubious asbestos-ridden property, proceeded to more than double the insurance policy. Then, as the world watches while his buildings disintegrate 6 weeks later, Mohammed even directs that one building be, quote, pulled. And subsequently, good old Mohammed gets a tidy $5 billion profit.
This one's for Larry Silverstein. Last time we talked, sir, I asked you if you could address some of the 9/11 conspiracy theories that you are accused of. Sadly, your response has actually invited more of them. I mean, for the record, everybody knows your infamous comments on PBS where you said pull Building 7 on 5/25 on the day of 9/11.
They were not sure they were going to be able to contain the fire. I said, you know, we've had such terrible loss of life. Maybe the smartest thing to do is pull it. And they made that decision to pull, and then we watched the building collapse.
Your official response was that it was the firefighters. My question is, it was pretty clear that you meant the building, and if it was the firefighters, they already are outside the building by 12 because the water lines were broken.
Ask the question.
And the fire chief that you said you spoke to, Fire Chief Negro, denies talking to you on that day of 9/11. Can you answer those questions and address the theories against you?
I suggest for everybody's consideration that we all look at the thousands of pages of testimony that have been rendered in the many years since 9/11, and let's use today's session for something that's...
Are you aware of testimony of bombs in the building before the building collapsed, sir? Are you aware of that testimony? Sir, there's testimony by Bear Jennings. Sir, you don't have to touch me. Listen, I'll walk away. All I'm asking is a question. I don't have to be kicked out. It's a legitimate question. You don't have to put your hands on me. But all I'm saying is, no, I'm not. I'm here asking. The question was not answered. That's why I have a grievance. Larry Silverstein was told not to come into work. That's why him, his daughter, and his son never showed up to work on 9/11. He put an insurance policy on the buildings. Reporters, do your job. Please ask some questions.
It is like a tragic comedy that we as people have allowed ourselves to be conned into ignoring the mountains of evidence that indicts traitors within the U.S. government and military, as well as dual nationals, Jewish Israelis, who happen to have also advertised their desire for a, quote, new Pearl Harbor type event that would allow them to carry out a perpetual war policy for reasons of greed and power. Wrapped up in a blanket of patriotism, of course. Whether you knew any of this or not, it has been hidden in plain sight.
Who had the power to pull off 9/11 without a hitch? Who had the most pressing motive? Who had the money to pay for all of it? Who had control of the military in NORAD to force it to stand down while 4 passenger planes went to their designated targets? Who knew the intricacies of U.S. commercial flights to get around the FAA air traffic control? Who had the power, if needed, to operate planes by remote control? Who had control of the courts in the United States to make sure that no wrongful death claims were trial? Who had control of disposal so that all the steel girders of the Twin Towers were shipped to China before they could be chemically analyzed? Who had the power to control the NYPD and the NYFD? Who had the power to allow dozens of suspects to escape to foreign countries, especially Israeli suspects? Who had the technology to bring down steel-girded buildings built to withstand forces much greater than aberrant planes and nominal fires? Who had the advanced computer knowledge to coordinate the attacks? Who had the state-of-the-art knowledge about explosives and detonators? Who had control of the press and media to curtail investigations? Who is the most familiar with and has political control over the city, New York, at which the attacks took place? Who has a history of unprovoked attacks or even false flag operations, some of which have been directed at the United States? Who has a network of spies operating in the United States that could facilitate the attacks? Who has personnel in almost every sector of the American federal government to create a massive cover-up? And lastly, as any detective would ask, who benefits? Who benefits, cui bono, from the attacks? Israel had the motive, the power, the money, the influence, the technology, the terrorist history, and most of all, was the only one who benefited on 9/11. Benjamin Netanyahu, who admitted in an off-guard moment that, quote, we're benefiting from one thing, and that is the attack on the Twin Towers and the Pentagon, and the American struggle in Iraq. These events swung American public opinion in our favor. The day after, Netanyahu said something even more incredible. In regard to the 9/11 attacks, he said, quote, it's very good.
Folks, we have only just begun to reveal the fingerprints of this crime scene. But the next question is, are we ready to face the truth? Well, I believe we are. So let us imagine a crime so audacious that it was practically advertised before it was even committed. In addition to the incredible act of false flag terrorism that is the 9/11 operation, I am talking about the supreme crime of aggression, defined by the International Criminal Court as the planning, preparation, initiation, or execution of an act using armed force by a state against the sovereignty, territorial integrity, or political independence of another state. Well, that is precisely what these criminals in positions of public trust did. First they planned, then they boldly laid out those plans in two documents. The first one, written in 1996, was entitled Clean Break, a new strategy for securing the realm. And it argued for regime change in Iraq based on the pretext that Saddam Hussein was a security threat developing weapons of mass destruction. Sound familiar? The second document, written in 2000, called for much, much more than regime change. That document was entitled Rebuilding America's Defenses, Strategies, Forces, and Resources for a New Century. This document laid out a plan that would require multiple wars of aggression and occupation so as to achieve a goal of full spectrum dominance. The name of the group proposing these criminal policies was the Project for a New American Century, or PNAC. And their membership happens to read like a who's who in Jewish Israeli American politics. To be fair, the Project for a New American Century did have one token Islamic figure, or, to use the terminology of the late great Malcolm X, a lone house Muslim. Getting back to the plans of PNAC and the goal of full spectrum dominance, basically this involves the American empire establishing global control of air, land, sea, and space, and cyberspace. In order to achieve this goal, a primary objective was to seize the world's largest energy reserves, specifically the oil and gas reserves of the former Soviet republics in the Caspian Basin, as well as the oil of Iraq, the former requiring the control of a pipeline route to deliver said oil and gas to international markets. Another objective was to establish permanent military bases in this strategic area so as to ensure rapid deployment to any trouble spots where the natives might just get a little bit restless. Now, the PNAC plan complemented another goal known as the Greater Israel Project. Going back to statements from the founder of Zionism, Theodor Herzl, the so-called Promised Land extends from the Nile River of Egypt to the Euphrates in Iraq. In Oded Yanan's A Strategy for Israel in the 1980s, Israeli regional superiority was to be achieved through a process of reconfiguring the Middle East by the balkanization of the surrounding Arab states into smaller and weaker states divided along sectarian lines. Lebanon, Syria, Egypt, Jordan, and Saudi Arabia were all in the crosshairs, but Israeli strategists viewed Iraq as their biggest challenge of all. And thus Iraq was outlined as the centerpiece to the balkanization of the Middle East. Iraq was to be divided into a Kurdish state, a Shiite Arab state, and a Sunni Arab state. The first step towards establishing this goal, however, was to instigate a war between Iraq and Iran, a war that would significantly weaken both states. So while Saddam Hussein served wonderfully as an attack dog against Iran, the moment he had fulfilled his utility, he became the butcher of Baghdad, and the balkanization of Iraq merely required a pretext. And that brings us back to the PNAC lunatics and their full-spectrum dominance agenda that required multiple wars and the inevitable bloodbaths that would follow. The only problem from their perspective was that the American public could not possibly be told the truth of this plan because there was simply no way that they would support it. So how would PNAC achieve this goal? Well, they acknowledged in writing that only one thing could deliver them the means to achieve their psychopathic dream, and that was, quote, a new Pearl Harbor. Only such an event could whip the American public up into the fever pitch of vengeance that could serve as the pretext for multiple wars. And lo and behold, the gift of 9/11 was provided, and the farcical War on Terror was born. Muslims became the new boogeyman. The clash of civilizations as envisioned by Zionist ideologue Bernard Lewis was instigated, and the Middle East would soon be set alight. Understanding the motive, let us now look at the fingerprints.
I have had long conversations over the past 2 weeks with contacts at the Army War College, at Headquarters Marine Corps, and I've made it absolutely clear in both cases that it is 100% certain that 9/11 was a Mossad operation, period. First, the disbelief, and what I show them immediately afterwards is an interview with a demolitions expert named Danny Jowenko, and it shows the third building at the World Trade Center going down. And they look at that, and I said, now you understand that if one of the buildings was wired for demolition, all of them were wired for demolition. And that's it. That's the tipping point. Getting into arguments about who was flying what and where they were and whether there was nanothermite, those things are true, but they're incidental. The thing that's necessary is to tell people 3 buildings went down, the third was not hit by a plane, it was wired for controlled demolition, therefore all of them were wired for controlled demolition, and at that point the reaction is rage. First disbelief and then rage. 9/11 has led directly to 60,000 Americans dead and wounded. God knows how many hundreds of thousands of people in other countries that we've killed or wounded or made homeless. This is an open wound. And what Americans need to understand is they did it. They did it. And if they do understand that, Israel's going to disappear. Israel will flat-ass disappear from this earth. I sent a film to one of my colleagues, and it basically had Americans grieving over their dead, coming back. And I showed one of them, it was a woman just wrenched by grief, over her dead soldier. And I said, if Americans ever know that Israel did this, they're going to scrub them off the earth. And they're not going to give a rat's ass what the cost is. They are not going to care. The first thing marked is astonishment. They didn't know. They truly didn't know. And these are not unintelligent people. They really didn't know. And the next statement is rage. Real rage. The Zionists are playing this as truly an all-or-nothing exercise. Because if they lose this one, if the American people ever realize what happened, they're done. The military has not been bought. The military is loyal, but it has not been bought. And if it ever understands this, really, really deeply understands this, and this is what I got when I put some of these things to the Army War College and the Headquarters Marine Corps, I mentioned to a contact at Headquarters Marine Corps, I said, they did 9/11. And it was, you don't mean it. I said, absolutely. And if they ever understand that, these people are history.
Completely shocked. Unbelievable. Right.
That's the view from the Palestinian side. Joining me now here in the BBC World studio is the former Israeli Prime Minister Ehud Barak, who's in London at the moment. Mr. Barak, welcome to BBC World. First, your reaction, having heard what's happened. At least 4 planes have been hijacked, and there may be more.
The world will not be the same from today on. I don't know who is responsible. I believe we will know in 12 hours. Bin Laden sits in Afghanistan. There is a source of terror.
Identify though, because we're not saying he's responsible for this necessarily.
No, we don't say that he's responsible. Every simple step, crossing borders or going on a plane or on a ship, will become more complicated. It's a time to launch a operational, concrete war against terror, even if it takes certain pains from the routine activities of our normal society. This is the time to deploy a globally concerted effort led by the United States, the UK, Europe, and Russia against all sources of terror consistently along 6 or 10 years. Iran, Iraq, Libya, North Korea. This is the only way. Without this clarity of purpose, there will be no world order, no world order possible.
Perhaps you recall news reports on 9/11 purportedly showing Palestinians dancing with joy on the day. This could hardly have been any more insightful for an already thoroughly traumatized American public.
Atmosphere, the V sign for victory being displayed in East Jerusalem today among jubilant Palestinians that the United States had been subject to this attack. What are we to make of that, Jennifer? Are we to, Yasser Arafat may issue this condemnation. Look at this. We're seeing people applauding, clapping, smiling, happy to know that thousands of Americans have died in this sneak attack. And there you see a V for victory sign.
The United States blamed by some Palestinians for its ongoing support, as it is seen, of Israel in this conflict, in this Middle Eastern conflict. However, while some Palestinians were taking to the streets in apparent celebration, one youth was quoted as saying, as he received a sweets handed around in celebration, "This is a sweet from Osama bin Laden," he said.
There's just one serious problem with these reports. As the German newspaper Der Spiegel later reported, the cheering of the Palestinians was unrelated to the events of 9/11 and was apparently instigated by Reuters reporters who were bearing cakes and sweets.
What's tendered as news and even cultural norms is proffered in a tightly controlled venue, which George Orwell called the Ministry of Truth, which holds the means to mold the minds of the masses. And this power is in the hands of a few. Nah, they're not prostitutes, as Gerald Celente would have us believe. And they're not corporate elitists, as Alex Jones puts it. They're Jews. And I'm going to tell you just who. CBS is owned by Murray Rothstein. He changed his name to Sumner Redstone to pass himself off as a blue-blooded Gentile. NBC is owned by Brian Roberts, who with his sitcom, The New Normal, is corrupting the morals of our youth and annihilating the core of a stable, responsible society. ABC is owned by Sidney Bass, with Robert Iger as CEO, successor to Michael Eisner. CNN, along with Time and People magazine, all under the umbrella of Time Warner, is primarily owned by Israeli multimillionaire Aviv Novo, who hired a public relations company to shield him from public exposure. CNN's CEO is Jeff Zucker, former CEO of NBC. Fox News is owned by Rupert Murdoch, born to Jewish mother Elizabeth Green, making him by Talmudic law a Jew. In the print media, Murdoch also owns the Wall Street Journal and the New York Post. Newsweek is owned by Jane Harman and Barry Diller. Harman's Newsweek is pushing that Jewish orchestrated red line, over which even more American Gentile soldiers will spill their blood for the Jews in Syria and Iran. The Washington Post is owned by the Meyer-Graham family, with Donald Graham as chairman, Dave Goldberg is CEO, and Barry Diller is senior executive. And the New York Times, America's foremost print media, is owned by the Sulzberger family, with Arthur Sulzberger Jr. as chairman of the board. Even now, the Times is repeating the weapons of mass destruction lie to get us into yet another war for the Jews in Syria. You see, the only news you're going to get is what the Jews deem fit to print.
These pictures and videos of dancing, celebrating Palestinians were broadcast around the world, putting the already thoroughly victimized Palestinian people at even greater risk of brutal and consistent Israeli violence. On 9/11, there were indeed 5 dancing celebrating Middle Easterners. The only problem was that they were Jewish Israelis. But you simply would never know this if you gathered your so-called news from exclusively mainstream media. Nonetheless, 5 dancing Israelis were positioned at a prime vantage point to film the planes as they crashed into the Twin Towers. And yes, the Israelis were in place with camera directed at the towers before the first plane hit. A woman observing them was deeply troubled by their obvious joy, literally dancing and high-fiving each other as the carnage of the day was playing out. She was so disturbed that she wrote down their license plate number and reported them to the police, who later arrested the individuals, 2 of whom being known Mossad agents.
I grabbed my binoculars and I could see the towers from my window. And this is where I'm looking. And all of a sudden, down there, I see this van parked. And I see 3 guys on top of the van. And I could see that they were like happy. They didn't look shocked to me. They didn't look shocked. I thought it was very strange.
We had received an all-points bulletin, and I just happened to see the van and, hollered over to my lieutenant. I think that could be the van. We checked it out, and it was. We were all on edge, obviously, so I really wasn't looking to make friends with these people, and neither were the officers that I were with. Once we started talking to them, they were pretty much like, hey, we're not against you, we're with you.
And at that point, we were taken for another round of questioning, this time related to our allegedly being members of Mossad. The fact of the matter is, we are coming from a country that experiences terror daily. Our purpose was to document the event. Our purpose was to document the event.
I'm going to ask this question more than once. What if the dancing, celebrating people were in fact Palestinian, Arab, or Muslim? Would there have been even one American of age who would not know about this? At this point, we need to talk about Mossad. Mossad is the Israeli equivalent of America's CIA or the UK's MI6. Mossad, like their American and British counterparts, are agents of state-sponsored terrorism whose business involves political assassinations, car bombing, spying, as well as a host of other illegal and immoral activities. Importantly, the Mossad's motto just about says it all. By way of deception, thou shalt do war. Keep that motto in mind when I tell you that a month before 9/11, the Mossad sent a general warning to the CIA alleging that as many as 200 terrorists were present on American soil and were preparing a major operation. The Mossad linked the plot to Osama bin Laden and told their CIA counterparts that there were, quote, strong grounds to suspect Iraqi involvement. On the evening of 9/11, 2 mysterious calls were placed to the New York City Police Department in which the callers claimed to have witnessed a group of Palestinians and Arabs constructing a bomb in a van that was headed towards Holland Tunnel. The police apprehended the suspects, and the truck bomb story was independently reported by CNN, Fox News, ABC News, CBS News, and other major media outlets.
And word late tonight that 2 suspects are in FBI custody after a truckload of explosives was discovered around the George Washington Bridge. That bridge links New York to New Jersey over the Hudson River. Whether the discovery of those explosives had anything to do with other events of the day is unclear, but the FBI has 2 suspects in hand, said the truck load of explosives, enough explosives were in the truck to do great damage to the George Washington Bridge. But they arrested the 2 suspects and they're questioning them as we speak.
Reports we're getting now, 2 or 3 men arrested on the New Jersey Parkway. Deborah, can you hear me now?
Yes, I can. That is the information that I'm getting from 2 sources, that there was a van either on the New Jersey Turnpike or the Garden State Parkway, and that it was near the George Washington Bridge. There were 2 or 3 men who were in the van. The van was pulled over. It is not clear why the van was pulled over, but when it was, law enforcers found tons of explosives inside of the van.
Perhaps you noticed that the ethnicity of the suspects arrested while attempting to detonate a massive bomb in New York City on 9/11 was not mentioned by any of the mainstream media. So I posed the question, if they were Palestinians, Arabs, or Muslims, do you think this detail might have been reported? Furthermore, what do you think the chances are that you would be unaware of this story if the culprits were in fact Palestinians, Arabs, or Muslims? Well, they weren't. They were Jewish Israelis, and this is a classic example of a false flag operation to which Israel has a long history. Probably the most unusual, if not shocking, event of the day came in the form of another white van that was stopped by a New York Police Department on 9/11.
I got a message on that plane. It's a big truck with a mural painted of an airplane diving into New York City and exploding. I don't know what's in the truck. The truck is in between 6th and 7th on King Street. All right, 10-4. I'll send the issue in the bomb squad there for West King. The 4? You brought that last message? That's fine. With a mural painted airplane diving into New York, blowing up. 2 men got out of the truck, ran away from it. We got those 2 under. That's good. You got those? Are you holding those 2 guys, Kay? We got them under. Let's get some units going here. Listen, the best beat the shit out of them. All right, get here. See that? All right, listen, you need any further on those 2 guys over there? You all right over there, Kay?
We have both suspects under, Kay. We have the suspects who drove in the van exploded. We have both of them under, Kay. Let's get some help over here.
Now, I'm sending you here to shoot there. I just want to make sure you and your guys are all right over there, Kay. That's all. What's the location of that, Kay?
Put them up. You know, we have both Neotrans driven that exploded. Resurrect.
Police recordings indicate that this van had a mural painted on the side that literally depicted a remote-controlled plane crashing into the World Trade Center and exploding. The van's occupants were arrested and were referred to as ethnic Middle Easterners in a U.S. government report. Of course, if they were Palestinian, Arabs, or Muslims, this incident would have been plastered all over the media as proof of an Arab-Islamic conspiracy behind 9/11. But few have ever heard of it, simply because it was another bungled false flag for which Israelis were ultimately responsible.
The Israeli newspaper Ma'ariv has reported Israel's former Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has publicly said the September 11th attacks have been good for Israel. Netanyahu said, quote, "We're benefiting from one thing, and that is the attack on the Twin Towers and Pentagon and the American struggle in Iraq," end quote.
In November 2001, Fox News aired an explosive 4-part series detailing a secretive investigation that was being conducted by U.S. authorities into Israeli espionage in the United States. The report revealed that around 200 Israeli spies had been arrested by American authorities, the largest spy ring to be uncovered in U.S. history. 140 of these Israelis had been taken into custody just prior to 9/11, and the remaining 60 had been apprehended shortly thereafter in connection with the ongoing investigation into the attacks. Many of the Israeli spies belonged to the electronic surveillance and explosive ordnance units in the Israeli military. Fortunately for the 200 Israeli spies, they had friends in very high places. Michael Chertoff is a Jewish Israeli dual national who as Assistant Attorney General oversaw the non-investigation of 9/11 in which the crucial evidence was all confiscated and destroyed before it could be examined. Chertoff's mother also happened to be a Mossad operative. Chertoff, along with other dual citizens in the U.S. government, not only spearheaded the cover-up, he orchestrated the release of over 200 Israeli suspects, including the 5 dancing Israelis, those caught with their explosives in their van, as well as those caught with the van depicting a plane crashing into the Twin Towers. Many of these Israeli suspects failed multiple polygraph tests while in custody as well, but you probably have never heard of any of them. And they were all quietly deported to Israel. Case closed. And then there is Rabbi Dov Zakheim, another Israel First champion. In 2001, Zakheim was CEO of SPC International, part of the System Planning Corporation, a defense contractor primarily investing in electronic warfare technologies, including remote-controlled aircraft systems, and the notorious flight termination system, FTS technology, that could hijack even a hijacked plane and land or crash it wherever. In addition, he was appointed as the Pentagon Comptroller in May 2001. During the same period, Donald Rumsfeld announced that the Pentagon could not account for $2.3 trillion.
Okay, Donald, did you ever find that $2.3 trillion that you talked about the day before 9/11? Did you ever find it?
It was always there, and what the problem was tracking it through the system. So when I arrived in the Pentagon and they told me that they can't track $2.3 billion that had been accumulated over the period before I got there, it turns out that there was not a legal problem or a loss. It was a matter of the complexity of the systems and tracking it all the way through.
Mr. Secretary,
we got to go.
Sorry, guys, sorry.
Zuckheim is also a co-author of the Project for a New American Century's position paper, Rebuilding America's Defenses, making him intimately aware of the need for a, quote, new Pearl Harbor. Let us also recall that Flight 175, which allegedly hit the South Tower, and Flight 11, which allegedly hit the North Tower, were Boeing 767s because Rabbi Zuckheim was in charge of a company that had access to Boeing 767s and the technology to retrofit them with remote control piloting systems. When we look at the alleged Flight 175 as pictured on the news media and official reports, it appears to be a retrofitted Boeing 767 that Zuckheim's company had access to, and it furthermore appears to have a flight termination system attached, which might be a better explanation for the expert piloting of aircraft on 9/11.
Second plane was an unmarked silver fuselage.
Mark, were you close enough to be able to see any markings on the airplane?
It definitely did not look like a commercial plane. I didn't see any windows on the sides.
And it didn't look like a commercial jet.
It was a military plane.
Could be a drone aircraft. That's an aircraft that's guided electronically to its target without having a pilot.
The plane circle around and actually come on to the opposite side of the building and smash into the Trade Center. It was great, to be honest with you.
Rabbi Zuckheim had access to the money, technology, and planes that were capable of carrying out 9/11, but don't worry, Philip Zelikow oversaw the official 9/11 investigation, and he has assured us that no Israelis were involved. So who is Philip Zelikow? He also happens to be a Jewish Israel First champion who Bush and Cheney selected to write the 9/11 Commission report. A year before that selection, Zelikow said the following: "I'll tell you what I think. The real threat is, and actually has been since 1990, it's the threat against Israel." But it gets better. Good old Phil describes himself as an expert in the, quote, creation and maintenance of public myths. He further defines public myth as a public presumption about history that may or may not be true, but which, nevertheless, exerts a powerful influence on the public opinion, and through that influence affects history.
The Israelis, in my opinion, do not have the capability of stopping it. They can delay it. There will also be many, many side effects, all of them adverse, from an Israeli strike. But at the end of the day, if we don't get it done the way the administration's working on it now, which I totally agree with, then we ought to take them out.
Secretary Clinton.
Well, we're working hard. We're working hard.
It is time to confront another social taboo, and that would be the obvious motive that an overwhelmingly Jewish-owned mainstream media has in showing Israel in a positive light, while Palestinians, Arabs, and Muslims are demonized incessantly, especially since 9/11. It is undeniably politically incorrect to say this, but I will say it anyway. The mainstream media is massively, disproportionately Jewish-owned, and the fact that people are afraid to admit this truth and discuss this blatantly favorable bias towards Israel is very revealing indeed. I think a Jewish correspondent for the Israeli newspaper Haaretz said it best, quote, "The Jews do control the American media. This is very clear, and claiming otherwise is an insult to common knowledge." But me stating this relevant and important fact will not stop the inevitable attacks, and therein lies the effectiveness of stifling debate or critical investigations. Only those of us who do not fear loss of income, freedom, or even our lives are willing to say such things. But it is not the personal risks that matter. My point here is to make clear that there is a serious conflict of interest when it comes to the reporting of 9/11 and so many other issues for that matter. But with regard to 9/11, there is stunningly incriminating Jewish Zionist fingerprints all over the event. But I shall repeat, there is no possible way that Israel alone could have carried out the 9/11 operation. So let me be emphatically clear on this. There are many American traitors, some Jewish, many not, who swore to uphold the U.S. Constitution and yet committed high treason on 9/11. 9/11 was undoubtedly a joint false flag operation between the governments of Israel and the United States. If we had more time, I would also discuss the Israeli links to the anthrax mailings, Sybil Emmons, Colleen Rowley, Able Danger, Mossad Front Company Urban Moving Systems, the National Transportation Safety Board acknowledging that there is no evidence of wreckage at Ground Zero from American Airlines Flight 11 or United Airlines Flight 175, P-Tex Enterprise Software and its links to Mossad, the corporation known as MITRE, which played a central role in subverting air traffic control networks on 9/11, the Israeli-owned Odigo instant messaging service that provided a warning to Jewish Israelis of the 9/11 events 2 hours before they occurred, Jewish judges like Alvin Hellerstein and Sheila Birnbaum who pressured the 9/11 victims' families into silence, ICTS, an Israeli company that provided airport security for every airport from which the allegedly hijacked planes operated, the killing of American patriot John O'Neill at the hands of Jerome Hauer, the 9/11 Commission report failing to mention Building 7, the unprecedented put options predicting the fall of American and United Airlines stock, the overwhelming evidence that the Patriot Act was written years before 9/11, and so many other truths/coincidences that the mere thought of them makes my head spin. Let this be understood. The matrix of power in our world is headed by the financial system. Those who control the issuance of money via the biggest banks are in fact the rulers of the earth, but only because we have allowed traitors in our governments to give them that power on our behalf. As long as that system remains, we will never know justice. The reason why the 9/11 myth exists at all is because the bankers are able to buy anything and anyone that can be bought. Through this inherently corrupt and unjust system, those with virtue and integrity are punished and ridiculed, while those motivated by greed and power are rewarded. This explains why virtually all politicians are lying criminals. They are nothing but political prostitutes. So the governments of the world are bought and paid for. Multinational corporations are likewise controlled. Education is nothing more than indoctrination. And of course, the mainstream media is nothing more than prostitutes of propaganda who are committed to keeping the people ignorant and divided. With regard to 9/11, they are providing aid and sanctuary to the mass murderers responsible for this event, which makes them, the mainstream media, criminally responsible as well. But once again, the head of the snake is the financial system, which translates to private control of the issuance of debt-based money. It is this system of power that corrupts every aspect of human society. Nonetheless, it is fragile because it inherently requires our consent. Let me repeat this. The financial system that is enslaving us requires our consent. Understanding this, we can see that we are our own prison keepers, but it does not have to be this way. We do not have to sell our children into self-imposed slavery. As for America, the insane lies and violence of my birth nation became so unbearable, I was compelled to renounce my U.S. citizenship and publicly declare that I no longer have anything to do with this madness. But I am reaching a point where, despite the shameful reality of what America is today, I see many bright lights, such as the courageous truth tellers who are standing up in greater and greater numbers day by day. 9/11 is a magnifying glass into the character of every person in a position of public trust. When so-called public servants profess their belief in the official myth that Muslims carried out this event, they reveal themselves as an untrustworthy moron at best, or more likely, prostitutes in the service of the tyrants. As uncomfortable as it may be to face up to, Those who control the education, mass media, and the vast majority of governments are in fact prostitutes who have sold their soul, and identifying them as easy as looking at their stance on 9/11. And this is the great gift of 9/11. If we receive this gift, we will rid ourselves of the traitors and replace them with people of honor. Calling for a new investigation is not enough. Calling for a new investigation will likely be used as the last-ditch escape route for the traitors to produce yet another whitewash. Allowing the fox to guard the henhouse is madness. Allowing the criminals to judge who is guilty and who is not is beyond stupidity. We, the people, are the guardians of truth and justice, and we must create our own institutions or completely reform existing ones in order to effect justice. I repeat, calling for a new investigation is not nearly enough. Number one on the to-do list is ending the private control of the issuance of debt-based money. After this, ending the United Nations 5 permanent member veto system is a bare minimum for UN reform. Anything less would require an end to the UN, as the UN system has facilitated massive suffering and death. No longer shall 5 permanent members be trusted to decide the fate of nations. It is for the people of the world to decide, not 5 northern nations. I would also call on the people of the world to demand reform at the International Criminal Court, so that consent amongst nations is no longer required to punish international crimes. With that done, the key players in the invasion and occupation of Afghanistan and Iraq, especially George Bush and Tony Blair, must be immediately apprehended and delivered to The Hague and prosecuted for war crimes and crimes against humanity at the International Criminal Court. In addition, criminal charges must be brought against Israeli leaders for Operation Cast Lead, in which they mercilessly bombarded a captive population in Gaza for 21 days, a population that includes over 800,000 children. The key to improving life for the people of the Middle East is for us in the West to take responsibility for the crimes of our nations and subsequent policies that have subjected the people of the Middle East to endless suffering. 9/11 and the war on terror is only the latest example of how we are culpable in mass murder. To redeem ourselves, we must take control of our governments, and this leads me to my last suggestion. If the U.S. government refuses to invalidate every law that is injurious to the United States Constitution, then the traitors who have broken their oath to uphold the Constitution must be arrested and forcibly removed by oath-keeping patriots, at which point the U.S. Constitution shall be restored as the supreme law of the land. While the U.S. military has been used as a tool of the empire, there lies before this military the opportunity to redeem itself. If the U.S. military can find the courage and honor to do this, I will for one proudly claim my U.S. citizenship. But more importantly, the world can finally be liberated from the yoke of the empire that is America today. This is the primary duty of the citizens of my birth nation, and I believe the fate of the United States, indeed the fate of the world, will be determined by their success or failure to restore the United States Constitution. Most of all, the time has come to confront the most important truth of all. And to do this, we need only stand in front of the nearest mirror. Take a good, hard look into your eyes and ask yourself, am I a coward or am I a man? And as for the women out there, ask yourself, am I the woman that I am meant to be, the most beautiful thing that exists? Are you fulfilling your responsibility as a mother? Now make no mistake about this. It is our generation, right here, right now, that will decide the fate of our world. So when our children ask us, what role did you play? What do you suppose your answer will be?
His Excellency Benjamin Netanyahu, Prime Minister of Israel.
A nation can survive its fools and even the ambitious, but it cannot survive treason from within. An enemy at the gates is less formidable, for he is known and carries his banner openly. But the traitor moves amongst those within the gate freely, his sly whispers rustling through all the alleys. heard in the very halls of government itself. For the traitor appears not a traitor. He speaks in accents familiar to his victims, and wears their face and their arguments. He appeals to the baseness that lies deep in the hearts of all men. He rots the soul of a nation. He works secretly and unknown in the night to undermine the pillars of the city. He infects the body politic so that it can no longer resist. A murderer is less to be feared. The traitor is the plague.